enjoying this?
Yeah. Welcome, everyone. And welcome to those people who are joining us via the live stream. That's for anyone who's outside the M25. Hello, come in. A few stragglers. We've just started, so you've not missed anything. Oh, say hello to your friends. Yep, hi. Settled? Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I am Sarah Golding. I'm CEO of CHI&Partners, and I am the current president of the IPAi. I took over the presidency of the IPAi as we were celebrating the centenary of the IPAi. And I announced my agenda as the magic and the machines to help explain my desire, if you like, to help prepare the industry for the next 100 years. I also announced that I wanted to learn from the front, using myself as a test case for the success of my presidency. If after the next 2 years I feel that I've discovered automation in our industry, then I'm sure that others will have done so too. Well, I'm certainly on that journey. I said then, and I'll repeat now, the machines are coming and we are going to be ready. Tonight, I'm absolutely delighted that we'll be hearing from one of South by Southwest's finest and debating the magic and monitoring of the machines, which I think is very relevant given the ongoing debate at the moment. So the format for this evening is very straightforward. I'll be taking my seat and learning from the very front, actually, from our guest speaker, James Schad, who will be taking us through what he sees of the implications of the relentless rise of the big four tech companies. After that, we'll call up our esteemed panel for the evening, who will debate what this all means for brands and agencies going forwards. So, I'd like to hand over to you now, James. James is the founder of We Grow Startups, which is a marketing consultancy dedicated to scaling startups and high-growth businesses. Prior to this, James was in our world. He had roles at Visium, MEC, and Cara. He's spoken at South by Southwest in 2016 and 2017, and we're delighted to welcome him here to Southwest One, slightly less warm and glamorous tonight. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everyone, for coming on a cold, wet Monday evening. So, without further ado, so the original title of this talk was The Relentless Rise of the Tech Giants. And I was going to talk to you about how Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple are now so dominant that everybody else should probably just give up and go home. About how they've leveraged network effects to create monopolies so far removed from their competitors that the normal rules of market competition no longer apply. And because they're so dominant, they can create their advantage through continual innovation. They can afford to test and learn and make expensive mistakes because their main source of revenues and profit are so unchallenged. But then I changed my mind. Because there are cracks beneath these mighty icebergs. I believe that in 10 years' time, at least one of these tech companies will be maybe gone, or at least a shadow of its former self. And one will emerge as a clear winner. I'm going to examine their frailties from 3 different perspectives. So firstly, looking in more depth at their monopolies and how technological progress and competition from new market entrants will gradually erode their position of strength. Secondly, how political and social backlashes are already undermining our faith in these companies. And then finally, looking at their struggles to diversify and how one company is future-proofing itself more successfully than the others, and what we can learn from them. So we've seen from the past that having millions of users and billion-dollar valuations isn't always a guarantee of future success. The Guardian here from 2007, apparently MySpace users have invested so much social capital in putting up data about themselves, it's not worth their changing sites, especially since every new user that MySpace attracts adds to its value as a network of interacting people. And it's not just software. that is vulnerable to disruption, also hardware. So this is Forbes from, I believe, about 10 years ago. Nokia, 1 billion customers, can anyone catch the cell phone king? But that couldn't possibly happen to our big four. They're surely too secure, too dominant in their monopolies. And the big four are clearly the dominant players in each of their core markets. They are monopolies, the kind of companies that are so good at what they do that no other firm can offer a close substitute. So Google commands 90% of the global search market. Amazon's 43% share doesn't sound quite as impressive of online retail in the US, but their nearest competitor is Best Buy with 4%. With Facebook, they are the world's largest social network. I believe that's actually crept over 2 billion monthly active users now. It's also the fastest growing. Over the last 2 years, it's added 500 million users, compared to Snapchat, 87 million, and Twitter, only 31 million over the same period. And Apple, despite marginally declining sales in 2016, still commands a 91% share of profits in their market because of the brand loyalty it commands and the premium it can charge. But how secure are their positions, and even the markets themselves? I believe that Amazon, with its obsession with customer service, and Apple, with its brand loyalty, are fairly safe in their monopolies, and we'll talk about them a bit later. But first, I'll look at Google and Facebook, feel a bit more precarious. So there's no denying that they're incredibly dominant players in terms of both usage. So this is the top 8 US apps of 2016, which are all owned by Google and or Facebook. And they are very good at monetizing that usage. So in terms of digital ad spend, they are by far and away the big two, and also growing at an astonishing rate versus the rest of the market. So Google and Facebook, with combined far larger than the rest and growing faster. But despite their best efforts, and we'll talk about that a bit later, a lot of their eggs are still in this advertising basket. So Google has 86% of its revenues from advertising, and the majority of that from search, whereas Facebook has virtually no other way of making money other than ad dollars. Admittedly, that is a lot of money, but we'll show how that might be under threat. And although they are dominant now, there are threats from future disruption and changing user behavior. In fact, for the last 2 years, Google's average cost per click has been declining between 10 and 20% year on year. And other players are getting in on the Search Act. So Google's CEO, Eric Schmidt, actually says that their main competition isn't Bing or Yahoo, it's actually Amazon. So this is a study which shows where people go to begin their product search. Their destination for product searches is Amazon over search engines. And Amazon is launching its own paid search product. And there are others nipping at Google's heels. So Apple launched App Store search ads in late 2016. And Snapchat has been hiring engineers in the search space. And also Pinterest is one to watch. And in my opinion, search will become increasingly fragmented and, a word that I've invented, nichified. So in an app-first rather than a web-first world, Google is less of a gateway to the internet, and people will head to the most relevant supplier for their request, which in a lot of cases does seem to be Amazon. And then there's voice. So this chart looks at charting the progression of voice searches from 1 in 10 back in September 2014 to 1 in 5 searches on mobile apps in the USA being voice in 2016. And the chief scientist at Baidu, so Baidu is China's leading search engine, predicts that 50% of searches are going to be either through images or speech by 2020. And how's this going to impact paid search? So Amazon's Echo and Google Home, don't currently support search advertising. And I'm not sure it's an environment where an ad product actually works. I mean, the power of artificial intelligence and natural language processing means that we're no longer searching and being presented with a plethora of potential answers. Actually, we're going to be given definitive answers or completed tasks. And it's unclear how that will be monetized in the same way. But I do think that it's still several years from hitting Google's bottom line in a serious way, especially when voice is having teething problems like this. So, yeah, perhaps not perfect quite yet. Yeah. And what about Facebook? How strong is their position? So this is quite an interesting study from digital analysts L2. So they took a series of brands that they work with and looked at 16,000 promoted posts across 2016. And looked how engagement with those posts declined over time. So their belief that people are engaging less and less with Facebook ads, worrying signs for a business so dependent on ad revenue. And changing user behavior is one threat. Another is the increased scrutiny of their biggest customers. So I'm sure some of you are aware of the quote from Mark Pritchard, the CMO of P&G. He earlier this year called out Google and Facebook for their murky measurement practices. Advertisers are waking up to the fact that these opaque walled gardens shouldn't necessarily be allowed to mark their own homework. Facebook is continually overestimating the delivery of ad campaigns and keeps on confessing to it. And also their most recent company report admits that 10% of Facebook accounts are duplicates and 3% are fake, which doesn't sound that much, but 13% represents a not insignificant chunk of an advertiser's spend. Or they can't guarantee the contextual safety of a brand's content, as we saw back in March, when advertisers pulled their YouTube spend after their ads were served around extremist or inappropriate content. So we can see the emerging consumer and business threats. This won't necessarily cause overnight collapse, but we can see the signs of erosion that might sink these titans. And there are other aspects. So next I want to look at potential social and political backlashes to the tech giants. So to steal a line from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And both people and governments are starting to question the focus of such great power in so few hands. So in February of this year, Mark Zuckerberg released a 5,500-word letter to the world. I'm not sure if anybody's bothered reading it. I just read a summary, to be honest. It kind of reads like his manifesto to be world president. He says that a connected world is a better world. And that feels like a noble intention. But who voted for him? Who says that a private company run by an unaccountable, all-powerful person that tracks your every move for the purpose of selling advertising is a company to set agenda for world politics? And perhaps Facebook is edging closer to the kind of company portrayed in Dave Eggers' dystopian satire, The Circle. Anybody read this? It is very good. But if you can't be bothered to read it, they made it into a film with Emma Watson and Tom Hanks. And here's the trailer.
So, May, do you think you became better or worse when you were being watched? We have cameras in place all over the world right now.
We used to go on adventures, we used to have fun and see things, and now it's all filtered through this. Does this really seem okay to you?
Good book, apparently dreadful film. 5.3 on IMDb out of 10. So probably read the book. And it might seem like a... Oh, sorry. I'm going to go back. Spoiler. It may seem like a paranoid fantasy with some pretty wooden acting, especially her boyfriend, dreadful. But it's not too far off reality. So Facebook's facial recognition software, Deepface, is now so sophisticated that it can recognize strangers in the background of your photos. Facebook also conducts psychological testing by altering news feeds without permission to see how it impacts people's moods. And this is my favorite. They even record your keystrokes for statuses that you write but don't submit and then delete, which is pretty creepy. And people are becoming more and more aware of the value of their data and the importance of privacy. So how far are we away from a scandal that prompts a hashtag delete Facebook backlash? And then, especially when Facebook and Google are gaining a reputation as the facilitators of our fake news problem. So this has been an unintended consequence of their dominance. So their algorithmic, non-editorial approach has created these filter bubbles with little or no control over the accuracy of the content served. It's a worrying situation when 2/3 of US Facebook users get their news from their Facebook feed, which is quite staggeringly high. And Facebook have admitted, so recently, that there were 470 Facebook pages with links to the Kremlin that spent $100,000 on sponsored posts during last year's presidential election. And that doesn't sound much, but I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's what they've fessed up to right now. And both Google and Facebook are cracking down on fake publishers and looking to put controls in place. But as they keep reiterating, they are platforms and not media companies. Are they and their investors really willing to bear the editorial costs of policing the huge volumes of content on their platforms? That would make a fundamental change to their light touch, highly automated business models and significantly hit their margins. And these guys aren't just engaging in ethically dubious practices, but also breaking laws. So Oculus Rift, the Facebook-owned VR company, lost a lawsuit earlier this year and was forced to pay $500 million damages to a competitor from which it stole code. Facebook also received a $110 million fine for misleading the European Commission during the approval process of their takeover of WhatsApp. So Facebook had claimed that it was technically impossible to combine the information from Facebook and WhatsApp automatically, but then proceeded to do it anyway. And 110 million is probably just a slap on the wrist for them. And even Do No Evil Google is being investigated by the European Commission again for promoting its own products in search rankings. So Pixel phones, Chromebooks, Nests, getting better positioning in paid search rankings. And another European threat is the advent of GDPR next year, which will impact both Facebook's and Google's ability to monetize their user data without specific opt-in permissions. So the GDPR issue is something that's probably worth a whole talk in itself. But I recommend, so PageFair is a pretty good resource on learning more about GDPR, but I would read up on it. So in the final section, I'm going to examine the attempts of each giant to diversify from their core, to become less dependent on their main revenue streams. How are they future-proofing their businesses? What are their next cash cows? So, well, they're all acquiring businesses at a rate of knots. So these are acquisitions made by the big four tech companies and Microsoft. They've spent a total of 130 billion in mergers and acquisitions, and Google or Alphabet is leading the way. This allows them not only to improve their products and diversify their revenues, but also effectively kill off competition and lock consumers into their ecosystem. And it's not just external innovation, they're also innovating internally by applying for a huge number of patents. So this looks at patents from each of the big four plus Microsoft over time. So 2012 and 2013 were significant periods, flurries of activity. But that's across hardware, software, AI, significant investment in patents. And they're also investing heavily in content. So in August, Facebook launched their Watch tab in the US to stream original video content with a focus on lifestyle and cooking. They've also secured rights to Major League Baseball and NFL highlights. They also tried and failed to land Indian Premier League cricket. So that's Facebook. Google has launched a paid subscription channel, YouTube Red, to show premium content ad-free, and also was also responsible for the world's first Oscar-nominated VR film. But Facebook and Google are just kind of playing around the edges in content. Apple have set their sights even higher. So they've announced that they're investing $1 billion in original content. They've also hired the ex-BBC and Channel 4 creative director Jay Hunt, who was responsible for commissioning Sherlock, but also bringing the Bake Off to Channel 4. So it's a fairly decent hire and backed up by some big investment. But it's Amazon who are the ones to watch. So they're the ones who are most successfully monetizing their content via the paid subscription of Amazon Prime, with high-quality shows like Mr. Robot and Man in the High Castle. Interestingly, they even they got an Oscar nomination from producing Manchester by the Sea. And they stream NFL games, they stream ATP tennis in the UK, and they plan to invest $4.5 billion in content in 2018. And an interesting one, which nobody has necessarily put their hat in the ring at the moment, but English Premier League football. So negotiations will be conducted in I think the next few weeks or months for the 2019 to 2022 seasons, and Facebook, maybe Amazon and Apple have been kind of touted as potentially putting their hat in the ring and ending Sky's dominance, Sky and BT Sports dominance. But is all this investment in acquisitions and research and development and content, are they actually paying off? Like, are they demonstrating commercial value? They might make the platforms more sticky, but can they actually monetize that? So Google is renowned for its big bets, its moonshots, but they're yet to pay off. So Google, through Alphabet, has spent $46 billion on research and development in the last 5 years on big world-changing projects like driverless cars and smart contact lenses and internet delivered via balloons and artificial intelligence driven by DeepMind. But since the start of 2015, these bets have seen a high number of executive departures and together recorded a loss of $6 billion. There might be some light at the end of the tunnel for Google, as they've recently invested in hardware. So they've acquired HTC, who manufacture their Pixel phone, and they're pushing the voice-powered home device with serious marketing spend in the run-up to Christmas. But they're still minority players in both those markets, so Apple and Samsung dominate phones, and the Amazon Echo has 70% of the US voice-controlled device market. So they are still relatively small players in those markets. And if and when they start to lose their dominance in search, as we saw before, they're yet to find the kind of real replacement for those advertising dollars. As their exec said, you're unlikely to win the lottery twice. And what about Facebook? So they say talent imitates, genius steals. So Facebook's bets aren't so much moonshots as just copying proven existing businesses. Its diversification is rooted in what it does well, so connecting people. So in the top left, we have Facebook Marketplace, so an Amazon eBay clone, launched in October 2016, a bit late to the party, and also with teething problems. So I think the first products on there were drugs and guns. So yeah, it's got some work to do there. Top right is Facebook Workplace, so this is similar to Slack, so an internal comms tool. So it launched in 2016, being tested by a few organizations at the moment. Bottom left is Facebook job posting, so a take on LinkedIn, currently testing in the US and Canada. And bottom right is Facebook Order Food, the originally titled rival to Deliveroo and Uber Eats. So it lets Facebook users basically order food without leaving the Facebook platform through their partner delivery.com. So a lot of copying going on. And one of their favorite companies to copy is Snapchat. So anything Snapchat does, Facebook seems to copy it. So Instagram stories and Facebook stories being a kind of prime example of that. In fact, some say that Snapchat's founder, Evan Spiegel, is Facebook's best product developer. And this is a lovely email. First of all, so this is an email exchange between Evan Spiegel, I think it is, the founder of Snapchat, and Mark Zuckerberg. And first of all, I love that billionaires write awkward business emails like the rest of us. Love to meet you and hear your vision and how you're thinking about it sometime. But also, I love Evan Spiegel's reply, slightly passive-aggressive, and also putting the ball back into Mark Zuckerberg's court. Snapchat are an interesting contrast to Facebook. So whereas the latter, so Facebook is all about order and control and optimizing through data, its audience as passive consumers. So Snapchat is about fun and chaos, a platform for creation. So it's also constantly coming up with new product ideas. So Snapchat innovates whilst Facebook iterates. You can't use algorithms to work out what to invent, but it turns out you can just copy what somebody else is inventing. So Facebook still has a massive lead, obviously, in terms of user numbers and ad revenue and share price, but Snap are clearly scaring them enough to steal their best ideas. And the younger demographics are in Snap's favor, which has probably motivated Facebook to acquire these guys. So TBH are an app you may or may not have heard of. They are big in amongst US teens and high school students. So we probably don't have many of those in the room. So what it allows you to do is anonymously compliment your friends using positivity-focused polls. So if you say Schad has the best smile, Schad anonymously finds out that somebody thinks he has the best smile. So this was launched not 9 weeks ago, but after 9 weeks it had a decent amount of usage, so 5 million downloads and 2.5 million daily active users, and Facebook bought it for $80 million, despite not having any revenue or any kind of business model. But it shows that Facebook is not desperate, but keen to reach that younger demographic. And also, will Facebook be able to kind of grow and monetize their audience any further, or is it just going to be a passing fad? But lucky guys who came up with that idea. And then outside of Facebook's social network, so one of their offshoots is obviously Oculus Rift, which is their VR headset. But I'm a cynic about VR in a way, so I'm more of an AR fan, in that the kind of the closed-in, impersonal world of VR doesn't necessarily represent a scalable opportunity. And also, Oculus Rift is actually one of the smaller players in the market, so they have quite a high price point. HTC has a similar priced headset which outsells it. And then at the bottom of the market, you have Samsung and Sony, and I think Google also releasing much cheaper headsets. And actually, interestingly, Best Buy are shutting down 40% of their VR demo stations due to poor footfall. So I'm not sure that betting on VR is necessarily the future for Facebook. Quick note on Apple. So I haven't really talked about Apple that much, in that I think Apple is just kind of going along quite nicely. They're kind of coping post Steve Jobs. They're doing okay. They've got the highest market capitalization in the world, the most revenue, and the most profit. They command an incredible premium for their products and have a very loyal customer base. They're also fairly well diversified. So although iPhone is their main cash cow, and the iPhone X appears to be a return to form, definitely in terms of reviews and also sales data, they're also making money from iPads and Macs, and then other covers products like the iWatch, which is the world's best-selling watch, and also their revenue from iTunes and Apple Radio and similar. So Apple don't necessarily need to worry. And then finally, we'll come on to Amazon. So these guys know how to do diversification. It's almost like online retail isn't their core business anymore. As Sir Martin points out, they're fast becoming a serious player in the advertising market. So eMarketer forecasts their 27 US ad revenue as $1 billion, so moving them not far behind Google and Facebook. And this has been aided by the release of a self-service programmatic ad solution. So advertisers and agencies can use their wealth of data about customers to target the most relevant audiences, but also, importantly, track the ad performance through to purchase. Obviously, purchase across Amazon's platforms. So that's an important last step of the customer journey that sets them apart and is potentially devastating for Google and Facebook. And then Amazon has a reputation as a kind of a low-margin, loss-making retailer. But in 2016, they reported 4 consecutive quarters of profit for the first time. And that was driven by this small side hustle they call Amazon Web Services, which was a technology they just developed because they had excess server power that they could dedicate to helping other companies. So developed for internal purposes, it made them $10 billion in 2016. And they are the #1 cloud computing company now in the world. And they've still got retail pretty much nailed. So they have a relentless customer focus, which manifests itself in 2 key tenets. So unlimited choice and being cheaper than their competitors. So Amazon Music Unlimited, top left, they've got 40 million songs, which is 10 million more than Spotify. And they're offering it at $3.99 a month, about half the price of Spotify. So more choice, cheaper. Prime Reading allows free access to thousands of books and magazines for its Prime members. And Prime is a great case in point of Amazon just being able to monetize everything they do. So how many people here are Amazon Prime customers? Oh, maybe slightly underrepresented. About 50%. So a staggering, so this is quite a mind-blowing figure. And the last time I spoke in South by Southwest, this figure was 50%, and I got heckled because the guy didn't believe it. So 50% of US households have an Amazon Prime membership. That was in March. Now 65% of US households have an Amazon Prime membership. So that's a staggering 80 million memberships spread across 65% of the houses. That isn't a piece of data released directly from Amazon, but that's, I think, a Morgan Stanley analyst has come up with that. So, you know, not from the horse's mouth, but a fairly trustworthy figure. And they're not only retailer and distributor, but they're also launching their own brands. So Iris and Lily at the bottom has entered the laundry market, looking to underwire their competition. By offering $10 bras. And also they've recently been making hires in Europe in the fashion industry with plans to launch 6 new private label fashion brands So Find Fashion is probably one worth checking out, which is going to receive, I think, a lot of marketing support across Europe in the next few months. And this plays to the fear that Amazon's knowledge and understanding of its customers, plus its control of distribution, will allow it to gradually introduce its own brands at the expense of the established players. And this is quite a kind of a well-told anecdote, and you may have heard it before, but imagine this kind of dystopian future for Procter & Gamble. So if you buy an Amazon Dash button for your favorite brand of detergent, Tide, you use it happily for a couple of months, pushing the button every time you need more detergent, and Amazon sends you a new bottle of Tide. Then one day, Amazon accidentally sends you their own brand of washing detergent. And initially, you're pretty annoyed, but you've got to wash your clothes, so you use the Amazon brand of detergent. It kind of works pretty much like Tide does. So the next time Amazon sends their own brand by mistake, you're just kind of happy, and you forget you ever even preferred Tide. And that's a fairly kind of dystopian kind of view of what Amazon could do, but it's not far off what they are doing. And then this is a patent for Amazon's Death Star. It's actually an airborne warehouse sending down deliveries with drones. And Amazon's current obsession is building a global logistics infrastructure so they are vertically integrated and are less reliant on outsourcing to suppliers like Yodel and DHL. They're also looking at Prime Air project focused on autonomous drone technology. Also they have patents to power their drones with Alexa so that they can communicate to customers when they're dropping off the package, which is kind of fairly mind-blowing. And also they're looking at developing self-driving lorries. So this tech will fuel the growth of another couple of new ventures. So Amazon Fresh is obviously their take on the online grocery market, currently in 8 cities worldwide, including London. And then Amazon Go stores are launching in Seattle and California. But the big one, Jeff did a bit more grocery shopping. He acquired Whole Foods, the American-founded grocery, kind of high-end grocery store, for $14 billion. And the purchase saw an increase in share price, which actually almost paid for it itself. And it understandably spooked investors in competing retailers like Walmart, Target, and Kroger. But also it spooked investors in CPG brands, so FMCG brands. So Whole Foods has a strong private label business that will now get more support and distribution opportunities. So, yeah, watch out, Weetabix. This is the. So Amazon also immediately cut price. So Whole Foods is quite a high-end, kind of high-margin retailer. Amazon immediately cut prices, saw a 25% uplift in footfall year on year, which is fairly staggering for kind of grocery retail. They were also stocking Amazon Echoes alongside turkeys for Thanksgiving. So Amazon are now the largest cloud computing company in the world, a major player in the ad market, and a fully integrated end-to-end on and offline retailer. So my prediction is that Amazon is the best place to weather the storms of the next 10 years and emerge as the world's biggest company, leaving its rivals in its wake. With Facebook the most vulnerable to consumer, regulatory, and advertiser backlash. So to conclude, I wanted to give you 3 tips on how to build a business like Amazon. So how can you be more like Jeff Bezos? So be competitive. So Peter Thiel, he founded PayPal. He's a big Silicon Valley investor. He says that businesses, so he's written a book called 0 to 1, which is very good. He talks about how businesses should find a monopoly, find a niche and dominate it, like Google has, like Facebook has. But Amazon have done it the hard way. Like they've scrapped their way up in retail, which is arguably the most competitive market of them all. This reflects their founder's personality. He's just relentlessly competitive and is obsessed about winning. So Amazon may end up as a monopoly, but they won't have got there the easy way. Be customer focused. So I spoke earlier about offering more choice and being cheaper. So users and customers aren't pawns or data points. They're real people. So rather than the patriarchal attitude of Apple and Facebook, who claim to know better than their customers about what they want, Amazon is more of a mirror, reflecting people's desires and giving them what they want, unlimited choice at cheaper prices. And then finally, be an astronaut. So I mean this not in a metaphorical sense, but in a literal sense. So yeah, he doesn't want to aim for the stars. He literally wants, so Jeff Bezos is obsessed with going to space as an astronaut. So he has a side project called Blue Origin, a lot like SpaceX, Elon Musk's company. So there's something similar with kind of egotistical founders, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, is that they all basically have set up a business to fund their real ambition, which is to go into space. And I'll leave you with the thought that, if nothing else, money clearly buys you a decent personal trainer. Thank you.
Thank you, James. James, would you like to take your seat on the stage? I'd also like to invite the rest of our panel onto the stage to join you. By way of introduction, we have Kevin Verbruggen, who is Head of Brand at Weetabix. Welcome, Kevin. Kevin has over 20 years marketing experience. He's worked in FMCG at various companies along the way, including Weetabix, Kellogg's and Cadbury. Most recently, Kevin has led the revival of the excellent Have You Had Your Weetabix idea, and has also launched the Weetabix protein range, which perhaps our friend from the previous chart has been.
Jeff Bezos, yeah, indeed.
The second panellist is Lucy Jameson, a founder of Uncommon London, which is a creative studio which she and her partners launched just 10 weeks ago. Prior to this, Lucy was CEO of Grey London, and prior to that, spent almost 20 years at BNP DDB, working her way from grad trainee to global head of strategy. And then finally, we've got Adam Arnold, who is the MD of BBH London. Adam joined BBH as a graduate in 2000, and he rose to CEO of ZAG, which is the branding and venturing division, before becoming MD of the main agency last year. Adam is our very welcome replacement for Alison Hode, who was no longer able to make tonight's engagement. So welcome, all of you. So I've got a few questions prepared for our panellists, but I'd really like to open it up to the floor, and this is your opportunity to ask them whatever you like for the next half an hour. But I'll kick off just whilst you all warm up. And Kevin, I'm going to come to you, given you're the only client in the room. Feels the right thing to do, given we're in client service. So what approach are you taking at Weetabix? You know, given this rise, whether it be Relentless or not, it's still a rise. There's huge investments, you know, being made in these 4 platforms by themselves and by advertisers. How are you continuing to build your brands and make them a success, given this context?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Good question. And one thing I would say is that I guess over the last year to 18 months, one of the things that we've absolutely adopted is the Professor Byron Sharp's work based on the Ehrenberg Bass Institute of how brands grow. We've become a lot more scientific and evidence-based in how we want to grow our brands. And I think we kind of put that down to 3 things. We want to be more relevant, more prominent, and then more efficient at doing that. So relevant, driving barriers to purchase, so getting rid of any barriers that people may have. So for example, on Weetabix, they may say, yeah, okay, it's pretty healthy, but does it taste that good? And you know, it's a bit bland and boring compared to other cereals. So we will absolutely drive those barriers of penetration down by developing products with tasty ingredients, which we've done recently. The prominence piece, that's mental availability. So within your category, if you can make sure that you're the first, if not the second, brand associated with that category. So once people say breakfast, if they can then come back with, you know, I want to have my Weetabix, absolutely brilliant. And we'll do that with really attention-grabbing, highly branded and emotive, simple communications messages. It's interesting that, Sarah, you and I were talking about Weetabix, and you developed the Have You Had Your Weetabix campaign in the 90s. We've got absolutely lots of pride and humility to go back to that campaign, and it's paying real dividends for us. As well as that prominence there for mental availability, we will absolutely drive the physical availability. So that's getting into more stores, getting more distribution points, getting more points of interruption so that we interrupt people when they go shopping. So it's making it easier to purchase our product. And then finally, efficiency. Across all of that, we want to do that as cost efficiently as possible so that we can really free up funds to do that prominence really, really well. So better, more cost-effective advertising and then putting that into points of distribution. So what that kind of means for us is, unfortunately, that maybe for this, and we're maybe zagging when the marketplace is zigging, but we're absolutely focusing on TV advertising. We've seen that both from ubiquity, from gain theory, so from a market perspective, TV, for FMCG at least, gives by far the greatest return on investment. For ourselves, with our evidence that we have internally, return on investment is by far the greatest with TV. We are far from maxed out, but we'll absolutely be putting our money into the best return on investment we have.
As well as that, though, you know, due to all these concerns around brand safety, you know, which obviously were back in the news again last week and this week, has that shifted your advertising? Has that encouraged your shift to more traditional channels? I mean, in March, when there was the first YouTube boycott, campaign reported that revenues for, I think it was ITV, Channel 4 and Sky went up, understandably, because everyone came off YouTube. Has that impacted your balanced spend?
It's our strategy, our media strategy wasn't based upon that, but I think that only serves to reinforce our choice where to be in a controllable medium such as TV. You can absolutely do that. You know, none of us here working at Weetabix developed Weetabix. You know, we're custodians and guardians of a brand that's been around for 85 years, and you know, our job is to manage that reputation that, you know, generations of us have lived and grown up with. So that's fantastic. So we've got a responsibility to do that, and I think that comes to two things. First of all, it's making sure that we are making sure we have strong associations with the right environment that we advertise in, but also more importantly maybe is doing the right thing. What we talk about internally is doing the right thing when nobody's watching. So again, that's reducing our sugar levels, our salt levels down in our foods, and again making sure that we're acting and advertising in a responsible manner.
Lucy, can I come to you next? All of these concerns around, you know, brand safety, do you think that is damaging the platforms irreparably, or do you think that people will? I mean, last time we had this, people, you know, advertisers boycotted YouTube, and then within months we're back spending gazillions with them again. Do you think the second time around there may be more long-term damage done?
There's two things, aren't there? I think one of them is I think people will increasingly figure out ways to mitigate against that. So if you talk to people in media, they're increasingly looking at, rather than kind of giving a black list of the sites they don't want or things they don't want to appear on, they're actually whitelisting stuff. Yes. So in a weird way, making programmatic in those platforms act a bit more like traditional media. Yeah. So I think that is one thing you'll see more of. But the other thing, which I think is perhaps a bigger thing, is the efficacy bit, which I think people are getting wiser around. So, I mean, we do a lot of work at both ends of the spectrum, or I have in the past. With big brands, you kind of go that mass reach. TV is still phenomenally effective, and it is one of the very best ways to do that. But with lots of smaller brands, it's not, and they can't afford it. And actually, Facebook and Google is phenomenal if you're building a startup brand. So I think we're going to just start seeing a more nuanced approach rather than everyone feeling they have to be on Facebook or Google, or everyone feeling they have to be on TV. So I think you'll see more of that, and I think you will see ever more pressure on them, not so much about necessarily the safety aspect, but the measurement thing that Mark Pritchard was talking about. I mean, when P&G are complaining about that, I think that does change the game.
Adam, what's your view?
I think I've got some notes here. It's amazing. The actual ad market is 5.5 billion in the UK for online ads. So the other day, I think it was Brandcast, is that Google, is that YouTube's forum?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're walking up to do the speech, passed a piece of paper, I wasn't there, which was the story about the link to paedophile content. Yeah. And to give them their credit, they addressed it immediately because their customers are in the audience. And I am sure there were people rapidly emailing their media agencies and pulling out, because that is the right thing to do. But it's not going to be forever. And my belief is that people don't understand the architecture of the web when they have a go at Google about these things. They don't understand the way that ad serving works. So Google will, of course, fix it. But it doesn't mean there won't be other things because of the way the architecture is currently configured that will happen in the future, and then they'll fix it. So I think it's not a storm in the teacup. It's bad for brands, for the association, but the numbers are absolutely tiny. And I think, there was a story recently on Facebook. You could profile people who were anti-Semitic, but the universe you could build was something like 80 people globally. Yeah. So these stories are big. But the actual impact is small, and I think so long as Google and Facebook fix these things quickly and are talking top to top with their clients, I think everything will come back and that things will carry on. Because nothing is without its teething problems. And I do believe that brands, as much as they need traditional media, need this too, certainly while everyone's working things out.
James, I'm going to come to you. So how do you think that agencies and advertisers should cope in this new world? I mean, you gave those 3 tips, but beyond the 3 tips of being competitive, customer first, and being an astronaut, how do you think we should react and behave?
Well, I guess this focusing so consolidation of channels to fewer and fewer big companies is, I think, to the earlier point, it's difficult for larger agencies and larger advertisers who, when the companies that they're dealing with, Google and Facebook, are actually bigger than and more valuable than them. Their clout, the advertiser clout, is less powerful, which is kind of putting the boot on the other foot. Therefore, kind of a big agency's negotiating power is almost completely denuded by the fact that, that there's, Google and Facebook have a long tail of 1 million advertisers that they can kind of tap into. Therefore, it's a struggle if you're big. I think if you're a smaller agency, if you're a smaller advertiser, if you're a startup, Google and Facebook are brilliant because actually they are democratizing pricing in a way. So auction-based advertising is, you pay what the audience is worth. It doesn't matter if you've got 10 million quid in your back pocket or £1. So I think for smaller advertisers and agencies, it's a godsend. For the big boys, it's a bit more of a struggle.
Yeah. Would anybody like to ask a question of any of the panellists? Yeah, we've got...
So I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with Scott Galloway, but obviously he's written a pretty big book about the topic we're talking about today. And he talks about how the sun has passed midday on brand. He says that all these companies were created at a time when you had, without being harsh, slightly mediocre products that are only a little bit better. Everyone's watching telly, and you can make these products seem like they're just proportionately better because you build a brand around them, and all everyone receives is a telly ad, right? And he says that era is over because I just go, Alexa, I need batteries, or whatever. Within any given category, right?
If she gets it right.
If she gets it right, yeah, sure. Well, the truth is she probably gives you own label batteries and doesn't give you Duracell, which is what happens, right? So because I suppose there's one side is just thinking about these people as people that we have to buy media off, like that's one thing, but isn't there a much more profound existential threat to brands, especially brands that maybe have got quite a mediocre product, if we're honest, that's only a little bit better than, if better at all, than own label? And does that scare you all in your daily jobs or whatever?
Do you want to take that? You've obviously read the book.
Yeah, I have read the book. Well, about 90% of the way through. I think it is a really interesting one. I mean, I think his prediction does overstate it massively, but I still buy the fact that voice search isn't going to be great for a lot of brands. We were just talking earlier, though, if your brand becomes synonymous with a category or synonymous with a particular thing, like Weetabix, where actually you kind of own it, you're probably fine. And that's a kind of similar thing with other brands I can think of, like I've worked on Marmite or something like that. You know, there are brands which absolutely own that territory. And so that is one really smart thing you can do. How do you own that territory? I think is increasingly one thing you can do. And then I think there's a whole kind of other thing about really looking at different ways of doing it completely. And I think that's going to work in lots of different categories. So one of the brands we talk about as being a really interesting startup is a brand called Everlane in the US, which some of you will know about. Fashion brand does, you know, radical transparency. And, you know, there are those kind of brands which are just never going to be on Amazon. And that's going to be part of their strategy is we're just not playing in that game. And I think a lot of luxury brands, like there's a big brand called First Dibs, which does all kind of high-end furniture and antiques and stuff like that. And they have gone out and said very deliberately, we will never, ever work with anyone who puts their stuff on Amazon. So that they're creating their own moat and their own way of doing things. And Scott Galloway obviously talks about stuff like Apple turning into a luxury brand, creating all that premium real estate, and actually building something where you just can't compete with it if you're Amazon. So I think there are going to be lots of different ways. You know, some sectors are just not going to be Amazon sectors. And then if you're in an Amazon sector, then you damn well need to own that bit yourself, like Weetabix.
Yeah, I thought about this one. So I bought the iPhone X, right? Not company money, my own money. 1,200 quid on a phone. And I had an iPhone 7. Mad. Absolute madness. And why did I put it in my diary? 8:01, I'm on the internet, I'm going mad because I can't get through, whatever, it's crashing. My relationship with Apple started, I wrote this down too, 26 years ago. When I was the computer monitor, the nerdy computer monitor at school, and there were these Macs, and they were better than the IBMs. 26 years got me to spend 1,200 quid that morning. Point being, I think people's relationship with physical brands that aren't just pure web technology. So I agree. In the startup scene, pure play web technology can rocket, can be exponential growth overnight. Physical products, take televisions. It's been a fight between Sony and Samsung for years. And John Lewis still sell a lot of televisions. So I don't know if overnight things change radically. And conspicuous consumption has just carried on in different guises. It's still a badge, it's still a brand. And I think it takes longer to build that loyalty than perhaps we're all imagining right now. And yeah, 26 years in the case of Apple.
Question. Yes. Oh yeah, wait for the mic. This is your moment.
Thanks. Just to try and bring together something from James's talk and what Kevin was saying. So obviously, when you think about these tech companies from a purely advertising perspective, there's a move to them becoming duopoly, and all you hear is advertising dollars just moving to Facebook and Google. But you said, obviously, Kevin, you're seeing ROI in television. So is that marketplace? Is it a bubble, and will those two companies ultimately suffer, as I guess James was sort of alluding to? Well, that's the weakness for them, right, is advertising.
Yeah. Well, I think all the kind of classic IPAi effectiveness work, that, like the long and the short of it, talks about TV being the most powerful medium, and I think that is because...
Well, online video, so the latest...
Take a note.
Well, your TV is still incredibly powerful, but Les's latest think piece, Media in Focus, talks very much about the power of video,
Yeah.
whether that be broadcast or online.
But I think what's key is it's video with audio.
Yes.
So I think that's what is the weakness of these channels, perhaps more so Facebook than YouTube, is that it's video without sound. And you know, obviously you can put subtitles in, but it's, you know, you don't have the emotive, you don't have the music, you don't have, you know, the things which make a great ad are the moving images and the sound. So I think that's a weakness of especially Facebook, perhaps less YouTube. And yeah, and it's all Facebook has is video without sound, and just a single channel with lots of users, with lots of attention, but that attention could go somewhere else, and they've got nothing really else to back that up.
Yeah, and just building on that point, really, something like I've read 85% of Facebook ads are viewed without the sound. And when you look at the cost per, so for me, I think it comes down to creative as well as media costs. So from a cost perspective, well, firstly from a creative, if I'm not getting a chance to tell my story and I haven't got really strong visual distinctive brand assets, I'm really going to struggle with my ad. So I can see how opening up on the M&M's characters on a Facebook ad might work really, really well for them, or in a YouTube ad where you've got 5 seconds before somebody pushes skip the ad. If I haven't got the distinctive brand assets that are visual like that, then I'm going to really struggle. And then the media costs, I will always be looking at a lead metric, right, you know, which then gets me to the lag metric of return on investment. One of my lead metrics will be what's the cost per reach and the cost per 1,000 people. And for completed ads on Facebook, that's probably about 10 times the cost. Now, you could say, well, it's, you know, you can get some hard-to-reach people. My perspective is I will just save my money and reach further people in a month or two's time. 95% of people buy cereal. They buy every fortnight. If I save my money for a month, I'm reaching other people. I can probably reach 40% rather than the incremental 3%, and they're on another purchase cycle. So for me, it's really, really cost effective. And I've got a number of messages to tell them about Weetabix, minis, protein additions, etc. So just go for the cost effective route each time.
It's really different though, isn't it, when you talk to startups who are e-com based,
Yeah.
or, you know, other brands where, and what they're often looking for and what they'll be bidding for in the auction is not reach. They'll be bidding for an app download or a click through directly onto their site, or even conversion through. So I think it's really different depending on how you're looking at what you want to achieve. If you're just comparing it directly with TV, for certain brands, it just makes no sense whatsoever. But if you want to achieve something quite different, an app download, and you set up the auction to pay the amount you are prepared, that's a really kind of clever, smart, easily controllable thing.
Yeah, I can see how it works though. Like in the short term, but that's not delivering like long-term value. And that
It is at
business has been built on that model that's succeeded.
businesses get to a certain level. That's the point, I think, and that's the long tail. You know, they get to a certain level and then they go, Jesus, we need mass reach if we're going to grow any more. And that's when they suddenly go, right, okay, let's look at some other media as well.
Because I think even that app download thing feels like it might have passed the peak where...
Yeah, there will be equivalents of that, though, for small businesses, whatever their destination thing is. But yeah, the retargeting thing means you're just bombarding an ever smaller group of people.
Yeah, so building again, it depends on the not just the size, you know, potential penetration of your category, but also the value per transaction as well. So we were saying before, you know, a box of cereal at £3 is very different to you know, buying a bike on Wiggle for £2,000 or something. You know, so that transaction means that you might get a very different return on investment.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything else at the back?
So it's interesting that TV has come up kind of a few times. One of the things I think we haven't really thought about or talked about so far is the impact that these tech giants are going to have on TV consumption patterns, behaviors, and ultimately advertising opportunities. So I just wanted to put that out as a topic and see what the panel thought.
I'll just take that one.
Working around Well, I mean, there is a measured decline in TV viewing from the younger demographic, 16 to 34s. I think impacts are going down consistently year on year. And I think recent studies showed that they're not necessarily coming back. So people assume that, okay, once they reach 35,
generational.
It's a generational thing, they'll come back to TV. And they're not. But I think it's still slow moving. And it's a slow decline.
Yeah.
And people obviously are consuming TV in a different way. But then I think the experience of a TV at the front of your room is still, I don't know, somehow special. But perhaps it's because I've grown up with it, and I can't really empathise with somebody who has grown up perhaps never with a TV in their house, consumes all content on their mobile.
My daughter, for about 3 years, thought the TV was called the tennis, because the only time it's turned on is when my parents watch Wimbledon.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, I think there is going to be, I think it's genuinely a big issue, because we're training a generation of people to pay to avoid what we spend our lives making. So, Netflix, whatever else, I happily pay my premium not to watch advertising, and I work in advertising.
Interesting though, isn't it? That most of these big platforms use TV.
That's what I was going to say.
I mean, I find it incredible. They all have 3 or 4 of us on their rosters, making great big telly adverts and posters for them. Whether that be Apple, whether that be, in fact, the only one who I don't think does it is Facebook. So, and Netflix.
Yeah.
Netflix spend a fortune promoting their content in broadcast channels. So, they see the value of some of the more traditional channels, and they're reaching this younger audience, this younger demographic, as well as an older demographic. And I find that...
Ironic.
Very ironic, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be a long way before it changes, but I do think it probably will change.
But you can look at their NPD, they're all trying to own the television set as well, whether that's a hedge or whether that's because they actually believe not exactly what they're saying. But Microsoft wants to own the TV, the Fire Stick, Sony, even though that they've got the Sony PlayStation, are creating products to go into the TV. Google have similar devices. So I don't think as a bit of real estate in your home, it's over. And of course, it is still the place for joint viewing. You have to have a very, very, very big laptop to get your family around it to watch Strictly.
Yeah.
So I just think it's unclear. And that's the world, that's the VUCA world we live in. The ambiguity is what makes it hard as advertisers and marketers to call something. But it is ambiguous, it's not obvious. And they're hedging as much as anyone else.
Is it that unclear?
Personally, I think so.
Numbers are going down. Top 100 brands top 100 FMCG brands in America, all in decline compared to the markets they're in. These are the people these are the sorts of brands who are investing in these brands. So I totally agree. It's not just like disappear overnight. I think everyone's like agreeing with that. But the decline looks quite inevitable, doesn't it?
Look at the PE ratios. Look at the PE ratios of these stocks. That means how much of that price is built on future earnings that we're anticipating they make. These are PE ratios that have never been seen before. So these companies do have to deliver. So to your point about could they disappear, yeah, I mean, from a stock market perspective, okay, they don't have debt, which is also unprecedented, their cash pile, but wait and see. They have to deliver on these. The watch had to be a relative success. The X has to sell. I don't think that the hegemony is given forever. If they buy smartly, they'll stay in business for a very, very, very long time, maybe for even our lifetime. But a Google car is not necessarily going to put Merc BMW out of business. So wait and see. I know it looks very obvious.
I don't mean so much that the direction these companies are taking as
vision.
Just the example you just gave. You go on Netflix, you don't have to watch ads. The young demographic have moved away from TV and don't look like they're going back to TV. The sorts of brands that have historically spent loads of money on TV are all in decline, and sort of what their budgets therefore are getting smaller. So separate from the fate of these big 4 companies, there do seem to be a lot of trends that say less money spent on the media that I imagine most people in this room have made a living making stuff for, right? It does. I don't see much evidence that that isn't happening. Like,
Yeah, I personally think there is a kind of issue going on, and we have to acknowledge it. I don't think it's nearly, I do get sick of the, advertising's dead, because it's clearly not. And it's clearly super effective. But I think there are lots of different ways of building brands now. And I think, we'd be wise to be looking at all of those and messing around with it. And to be honest, that's probably the reason we set up our new business, was to do more of that sort of experimentation. And I think that's fun, though, because what I don't think is going to go away is the fact that business people are going to need creativity to reach people. I think it's going to look really different from, in 20 years' time, it's going to look really different from the advertising model we have now. But you're still going to need super creative people who need to find ways to connect with humans.
Yeah, and putting it into perspective, TV is still by far the biggest medium, isn't it? It's the most cost-effective, and from what I'm seeing, not just in FMCG, but across all categories, it gives the best short-term and the best long-term conversion to return on investment. But I think we should also remember that, again, it probably comes back to your previous point about brands and the death of brands and so on, as well as the death of TV. You've got rather doom-monger. But I think for me, it's a brand the comms is one piece of it, and as Dave Lewis said recently about Tesco, we can't advertise our way out of behaviour. Something we behaved our way into. Thank you, much more eloquently than I did. And another example would be from a competitor of mine, unfortunately, but Kellogg's Cornflakes. When a few years after Kellogg's Cornflakes was developed in Battle Creek in America, after a few years there was 100 brands of cornflakes. And one survived because they absolutely got the best product integrity, that tasted great, had brilliant packaging that kept the product fresh. So I think, whatever it is, it's always about product integrity. He talks about P&G and making sure that, the Fairy Liquid, for example, absolutely performs better than private label. And, we've all got, I think, responsibilities as brand owners to make sure that the product that somebody's paying for is absolutely the best integrity it can be.
That's a rule for agencies as well, isn't it? Sweat the product, sweat the idea. And that's what wins, isn't it? So the greatest creative ideas, the greatest creative execution wins. And we have to believe in ourselves and in the power of all of our fantastically creative minds. And I think there's a risk that the industry has a kind of crisis of confidence. Other people see the value of our creative minds, look at the big consultancies coming and eating us all up. They see the value of what we do, and I think it's really important that we sweat our product and, to Lucy's point, make sure we have the very best unique product we can possibly have in whatever agency we work in, and then you win.
Yeah. I ask myself sometimes, are we wheeling in Trojan horses into our agencies, right? So Google, not just because I'm a fanboy, do I love working for Google, but I think it's very important. If Google wants to work with BBH, I want to work with Google. However, what's the long-term game here? And we ask ourselves this question, and I simply conclude that I don't believe it's in Google's 10-year plan to wipe out creative agencies. Certainly not premium ones that are delivering creativity. I don't mean because we do ads for them. They may or may not be able to live without that. I simply mean I don't think it's part of their business model. Yeah. Look at what Alphabet have bought. Look at the moonshots. They invented the term. Look what they're doing. You think they want to build creative agencies? Running a creative agency is hard. It's really hard work. I don't think that's part of their plan. So I think we are here. After the 20-year plan?
Definitely here.
Yeah, we're definitely right now. I think we're here for a while, and I don't think they're trying to do our job. But, we have to remain bloody good at our job to ensure that's the case.
We should have one last question. This lovely lady at the front.
On that, I suppose, we know that Google and different platforms are building lots of emerging technologies, investing a lot of money in self-driving cars and all sorts of kind of things that probably customers don't really want or don't really need at this point. How much should we as agencies actually be investing in that now rather than waiting for platforms to tell us, well, you can do this now, so find some way to advertise against it?
So I was going to make a point earlier after Kevin was speaking, that he used to be my client when I was at Visium. And at Visium, we had this philosophy of 70, 20, 10. So you invest 70% of your money into provenly effective channels, like TV. You invest 20% into innovation, perhaps within those channels, so doing something different. And then 10% in pure innovation, so doing things that you have never done before, never tested, never proven. And that as a model for investment, and then thinking that 10% is a future 20%. But if it doesn't work, it's only 10% of our investment, it doesn't matter. Kevin didn't always listen to that kind of approach.
Bad clients. No.
But I do think that more brands should take an approach of, and agencies of.
I mean, but the challenge, I guess, is that just our innovation budgets versus an Amazon or Google's innovation budgets are absolutely,
but perhaps embracing their innovations, but perhaps, looking at how we can use, Alexa,
well, you're looking
10% building a skill.
Agencies growing up around what do we do with voice search that didn't exist before. And there's suddenly there's a whole little business line going on there. And you're kind of like, off you go. I thought it was fascinating when I spent time at Facebook. There's a whole ecosystem of agencies based purely around Facebook platform, who are Facebook marketing partners. I mean, there are just hundreds of them. And so, we're not very close to any of that stuff.
It's called something Plankton, which is built up. It's a great name. It's called something like Unlimited Plankton. And its job is, it approaches advertisers direct and says, look, we'll take have you had your Weetabix telly ad? We'll turn it into an Instagram story for you. Yeah. And they're making off like bandits. We can do that within agencies. We don't need unlimited plankton to do this for us.
Right.
It's a great name.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you to what a brilliant panel. How lucky are we to have them with us today, sharing their wisdom. So thank you to James, thank you to Kevin, thank you to Lucy, and thank you to Adam, ably stepping in for Alison. Thank you very much, that was brilliant.